As promised, we are back with the endgame version of Arc Lightning for Path of Exile 2. After the skill demolished the campaign, which we have covered in the League Starter Guide link in the description, we transitioned into endgame without having to change builds, thanks to Arc's impressive clearing speed and single target damage while on a budget. The build exceeded my expectations with its immense damage output, sitting around 1.5 million at the moment. This is enough to one-shot rares in tier 15 maps with 4 to 5 mods each. Endgame bosses didn't fare any better, as the first Breach Lord attempt I had went way better than expected. The whole thing didn't take more than 20 seconds, which made me chuckle. And it's not just damage that we have. We got a large mana pool that protects us from damage thanks to Mind Over Matter Keystone. With it, we are basically immune to being one-shotted, although we are still a spellcaster, so we prefer keeping distance since getting stun-locked is a thing in this game, unfortunately. So yes, despite our massive damage and large mana pool, we still die sometimes. However, it was really impressive to see what this build can do with only 10 divine budget, and we are not even using a 6-link. Alright, let's begin with our Ascendancy. We are a Stormweaver, mainly due to mana support. First we take Constant Gale. This node grants us permanent Arcane Surge buff. Arcane Surge grants us 10% more cast speed and 20% more mana regen overall. Pretty simple and effective. Next we take Force of Will. This node increases the effect of Arcane Surge on us by 1% for every 15 mana we have. I guess you guys can tell that we will be scaling a lot of mana in this build. The remainder of our Ascendancy nodes are optional, as they only provide some damage without any mana support. For the third lab we got Scouring Winds. This node adds another minus 20 resistance reduction to our exposure effects for a total of 40%. This coupled with one of the nodes that we have allocated on the passive tree, and our lightning exposure now reduces enemies' lightning resistance by 50. We are using lightning exposure support gem in this build to ensure that this is always the case whenever we hit something. Anyway, for our last Ascendancy node we got Strike Twice. This one allows us to inflict 2 shocks on the same enemy instead of just 1. Again, this is just for more damage. The downside of shock duration reduction is irrelevant here because we have lots of cast speed. Alright, that was it for our Ascendancy. Now let's take a look at our passive tree. Our tree focuses on mana, intelligence, mana regen, spell damage and cast speed, spell crit chance and crit multi, lightning damage and lightning penetration, jewel sockets, and mana cost reduction. And that was it for our passive tree. Now let's take a look at our items. Any good caster build needs a good weapon. As such, we went with a wand that has +3 to level of all lightning spell gems. That alongside increased cast speed, increased mana regen, gain percentage of damage as extra lightning damage, increased spell damage, and of course, a high mana roll. I bought this for 2 divines, but you can get more expensive versions with even more spell damage and extra gem levels if you can afford it. Now to go with our wand, we got a focus that has +2 to level of all spell skill gems. That alongside the high mana roll, increased spell damage, increased spell crit chance, and the resistance roll. Alright, at this point we are just going ham on increasing gem levels. A good place to get more of that is on our amulet. We got one with +3 to level of all spell skill gems. That alongside the high mana roll and lots of attributes. You're going to need these attributes to complement the requirements for one of our items, which we will talk about soon. Just don't forget to anoint your amulet with mental toughness for its increased mana regen, but most importantly the reduced mana cost of skills while not on low mana. This is important because spending less mana on offense gives us more breathing room for defense. Now, we did mention that we need a lot of attributes, and that's to complement the requirements for Warrior's Invictus chest. This powerful body armor grants us different bonuses per socket rune or soul core. You want to buy one with increased maximum mana and increased elemental resistances per filled socket. Since Path of Exile passive tree lacks percentage modifiers for scaling life and mana, this ends up being best in slot for now. I bought mine corrupted with chaos resistance since I needed that to reach the 75% cap. This chest also has a great amount of built-in defenses like armor and evasion, which visibly makes us tankier in maps. Anyway, our next item is Midnight Braid Unique Belt. This item grants us some mana and all elemental resistances, but most importantly we use it for its 50% damage taken recouped as mana in the next 8 seconds. It is a cheap build that can be corruption hunted for something like increased resistances, like what we have gotten over here. Next we have a ring with mana, increased mana regen, intelligence, and a decent resistance roll. Our second ring is quite similar, having more mana and increased mana regen, but this time we got increased cast speed and increased item rarity instead. Now rarity isn't part of the build, but it's nice to have it on at least one of your items, and it's easier to get on rings. Now for our helm, we got a helm with lots of mana and energy shield, that alongside chaos resistance, increased critical hit chance, and intelligence. You'll be getting mana instead of energy shield from your gear thanks to Eldritch Battery Keystone, which we have allocated on the passive tree. This also applies to our gloves, as they have lots of energy shield, a high mana roll, cold resistance, and increased critical damage bonus. Last but not least, for our boots, we got a pair of boots with high mana roll, 35% increased movement speed, which is essential for late game, and lots of resistances. We are aiming for 90% on all of our uncapped resistances to offset stuff like exposures and elemental weakness curse. But with that, we are done with our items. Now let's take a look at our gems. For our main 5-link setup, we have Arc Lightning as our main damage dealer. It's supported with Arcane Tempo for more cast speed. Next we have Inspiration to reduce its mana cost, Lightning Penetration for bosses and enemies with high elemental resistances, and Lightning Exposure support whenever we shock something. The difference of power between Path of Exile 2 support gems compared to Path of Exile 1 makes it feasible to ignore the last socket altogether. The high cost of a perfect Jeweler's Orb is simply not worth it. Anyway, next we got a secondary 5-link damage setup. We have Orb of Storms, which we use a lot while mapping, Overburdens to grant us one additional maximum active Orb of Storms, Persistence to allow our orbs to last longer, Considered Casting for that extra hit damage, and Font of Mana. Don't underestimate Orb of Storms, as it's unironically more useful than Arc while mapping. If you get stun locked or frozen, your orb will continuously zap nearby enemies, which will end up saving your life more than what you think. It also contributes to most of our damage against bosses. Anyway, next we have a 4-link damage support setup. We got Mana Tempest. It's supported with Premeditation to allow supported gems to deal 15% more damage, Strip Away to further increase the effect of our exposures, and Ingenuity. Standing in a Mana Tempest provides powerful offensive capabilities at the cost of an escalating mana drain. Ideally, you want to cast it and stay in it no more than 5 to 7 arc casts before leaving it to start a new Tempest. Otherwise, you will be running out of mana soon. Last but not least, we got Archmage as our only buff reserving 100 Spirit. This one causes spells to gain additional lightning damage the more mana you have. At our current mana level, this is exactly 240% more damage in exchange of 5% additional mana cost to skills based on our maximum mana. This is somewhat mitigated, however, by our investment in mana cost reduction on the tree, which makes continuous casting sustainable with enough mana regen. But with that, we are done with our gems. Now for jewels, get yourself as many copies of a jewel like this one. You are looking for increased crit damage, spell crit damage, and either increase spell damage or elemental damage. Just make sure that at least one of your jewels have the 2% mana recovered on kill suffix, which will make your life a lot easier, especially while mapping. Now for the Venom Drought quest. At Act 3 we went with 25% increased mana regenerate, and for Act 6 we went with 10% increased chaos resistance. And that was it for our best Arc Lightning build for Path of Exile 2. If you guys have enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future build guides like this one. My name is Phoenix and I will see you all in the next video.